spark questions, spark thoughts, spark what innovations that we want to pursue at the college level going forward. It's only befitting that we know or we hear what each one or what the conclusion was from each of the sessions. So can I kind of, in any particular order, Jason, I know you wanted to go first?
So Kath and I led the discussion on flipped instruction. I'm not sure if we came to any conclusions. But we kind of divided our slides into two. The first slide was focused more on what is flipped instruction. So thinking about how to start with concepts that are important to your discipline or your course, and then add videos as part of an instructional material that they do outside of class so that they can do actual hands-on constructivist learning inside of the class. One of the things that we talked about was technology and its usefulness or not, or unusefulness inside a classroom setting, or whether it will work at all. So that thinking that the flipped instruction model allows you to put your lectures using videos outside of class, so that technology doesn't necessarily have to be used in the classroom. I don't necessarily need a PowerPoint to hold a document-based discussion in class. And then active learning and flipped instruction are related concepts. So as Dr. Stearns talked about earlier today, we could do active learning using clickers, and I could be giving a lecture and I could get you involved in that sense. But the flipped classroom instruction model allows us to put the lecture outside of class so that we're actually doing constructivist activities inside of class, like Socratic seminars and document-based discussions and simulations and methods of those sorts. And then the second slide were just comments that came generally out of the discussion toward the end, such as I think there's a general feeling that we all worry that our students don't necessarily do their homework before they get to class. So that the fear that they're not going to watch the video outside of class is actually still the same. That little ways of assessing student learning can help us assess students' engagement in the materials, period. There's an important place for lecture, that just because we're talking about flipping the classroom so we can do constructivist activities in the classroom, sometimes a lecture is what's called for a particular topic or a particular concept. Analytics are a great way to make sure that students watch videos. So if you have a YouTube account, which you all do because you all have a Gmail account for your email, and you create a video, you can actually see how many people watched your video, from where in the world, and at what point they stopped watching the video. Which is always fun, because I guarantee you nobody's watching my videos outside of my classroom. So I know if everybody stopped watching after 5 minutes, where's my students? And videos enable students to look back on what was important and use it almost as a study guide. And that was a really nice piece of the flipped instruction model. So those were the pieces that we talked about.
Thank you.
Jason, could you drop the shades, please?
Sure thing.
Thank you.
So I'm going to represent the discussion I sat in on. So two of the topics that we talked about were tutoring and research. And one of the proposals that there seems to be some support for in CASE is to play with maybe the idea for certain selected classes for professors to pitch having a tutor in the classroom. So Walter actually brought this to us as an idea, and we had a discussion that some people have tried this at Wagner in different ways. So it might act as the traditional tutoring where they're getting work study for sitting in on the class, but for some classes, like I'll give my own example, sometimes I'll create a new special topics class, and so there's no student on campus who could possibly be a tutor for that. So I might choose an upper level psychology student to become my tutor for that class, sit in on the class, maybe take the class as an independent study, And so this might be someone who I am mentoring to get ready for grad school, have that student sit in on the class with me, and then, and then Walter gave the example that some of your classes will differ quite a bit from year to year, and so a student might go to a traditional tutor who took the class a year ago or 2 years ago and say, well, what did he mean when he said this? And the tutor won't really be able to translate that, or maybe you won't even remember exactly what you said if you're like me. Like, well, what, like I'll use examples that come to me, and sometimes students will even ask me, well, what did you mean when you said that? And I'll have to sort of like spend 5 minutes figuring out what it was that I said and where we were with that. So this idea of having tutors sit in on the classroom, you found that Muhlenberg College used this very successfully, and it might be something that we could do without much additional cost, and it might be a really great experience for students who are getting ready for graduate school or really want an additional challenging experience. So it might be someone who's taken the class before, who then does an independent study where there's additional things that are added, or it might be a new class. So that's one of the things that we talked about. And then another one we talked about was, how do we help students to formulate creative scholarly research questions using databases across disciplines? And so, we definitely have all sorts of things in place. We've got librarians who are so dedicated to helping us do what we need to do in our classrooms, but really helping students to figure out how to ask questions and how to use databases. So Allison brought this to us because in particular, history uses so many different databases that each of them have their own little quirks. So for example, I said, I don't usually, after the first year program, use the librarians to teach how to do searches in psychology, because I think with my disciplinary perspective, I actually will do a better job with the students' time. So I'll have a day when we're in the library in my sophomore level class, and we'll work on that together, and then I'll do a lot of one-on-one helping students to identify the right sources, but then also, that's always something that we're all working on, right, is figuring out how do we help students to formulate a question that's going to lead to a really fantastic research project. And then, as Allison was saying, this is such an important skill for students to have in the workplace, because this is so much what workplaces will want from them. So, a little of what we were talking about.
So we don't have a PowerPoint, but I'm going to stand near the computer anyway. Seems like the right thing to do.
Virtual presentation.
I know, the IT guy has paper.
Back to basics.
So the discussion I sat in on was very similar, at least in part, to what Jason and Kath covered. But we specifically discussed learning environments and professional programs, mainly in teacher education and nursing. And what we found from some of the feedback, we actually had the nursing graduate students in the room, so we were able to get some good feedback, is that what they felt was a broader sense of community, being able to partake in these online discussions, and from the faculty perspective, they felt that it increased engagement. Students were using these tools more and spending more time on their coursework without even realizing it, because there's different ways of accessing information, different ways of communicating with faculty members. And what the discussion groups actually led to were instructors were able to facilitate discussions more easily. A lot of the students who like to hang out in the back and not participate in class actually came to the forefront, and was another vehicle for them to discuss, to participate, and it actually gave them more confidence when it came to time in the classroom. So it was something that the faculty really found very favorable, and were very happy with the outcome. And from the faculty perspective of teaching the course, some of the faculty in the room were allowed to experiment with different things without feeling like they were failing in front of the class. So they can do things online, but they weren't scared because they were in front. They were in their home, in their pajamas, doing this, and it made them more confident moving forward with using technology and not being afraid to fail in front of the class. So thank you.
You don't even give me a chance to settle in, huh? I'm actually a little depressed because I think I outsmarted myself. I invited the person who runs the entrepreneur program at Monmouth University to come in and talk about what he's doing with experiential learning and the entrepreneurship program there. And it was so impressive that I said, boy, what a failure I am with what we're trying to do here. I mean, the question at stake to discuss was how to introduce an experiential program in entrepreneurism into the management department at Wagner, and I can't report anything. I don't know what we would do. I mean, it was a very lively discussion. He's got a program that is extraordinary, where they actually start in the beginning of the semester, and within the first 2 classes, they select a product, and they complete it and market it by the end of the semester. And he brought a whole sample, stiletto fragrance, I remember, and the Nino on the Park spaghetti sauce, and many of these products are actually on the market still today. And many of the students who were part of the process continue to work with that product today, or did for many years thereafter. They started a soup kitchen, they started a consignment store, spaghetti sauce, stiletto fragrances, a bunch of different ideas. And so I have nothing to report as to how we could do this for Wagner. That's my ultimate. I mean, obviously, we've done some experiential work in the business department. I've designed a class where we broke our marketing students into little mini advertising agencies and advertised for different companies in the community. And we had a lot of success with that. But to actually begin an entrepreneurial program of that magnitude would require some restructuring that's beyond. So I think I got caught up in my own discussion there. So, but that's basically what we did, and we're going to keep thinking about it until we find a good solution that we can propose.
Well, you think he's willing to comply now?
Well, he asked me about an adjunct position, to tell you the truth.
At a special pay, not at 2012.
No, but I mean, they've been doing this, as he said, 20 semesters now. So they've refined it over a period of time. And they create their own funding. I don't want President Guasi to hear this, but in fact, they fund this themselves through the profits of the business, believe it or not. He gave me a magazine at the end where he made $28,000 on this restaurant magazine for New Jersey just in the last semester. So I don't know how we would go about doing that. They also have donors, people that participate in exchange for being part. They do a presentation at the end of the semester. I went to one of them in the Woodrow Wilson building. It's just an unbelievable building over there at Monmouth. And the bankers are there, all of the people they buy services from are there. The department is all there. It's really quite impressive. But I don't know how to replicate it yet. I have to do a hell of a lot more thinking before I would propose anything. But it was really quite an interesting session. Actually, we ran quite a bit over because there were so many questions, particularly about how we could integrate critical thinking into the entrepreneurial experience. Okay?
Thank you.
At this point, we'd like to open it up for questions. Comments, suggestions?
A comment, going back to what Amy said about the tutoring and research session.
Willing to do that, to come sit in our
So
class?
I know-
I could really use the tutors. Oh my God. Because, each semester you may, teach it differently, and then they go to the tutor and say, oh, tutor said she taught me this way. Now,
Like, let's take your business statistics
right,
class.
that's the one I
If
mean.
you identified a student who was really interested in an MBA, or really wanted to maybe do a doctorate of business practice, that might be an ideal student to do that with. And so when Walter was describing this, I said, well, I know Jean Holly did this with a couple of students where she would identify someone who was planning to go to grad school who really would benefit, so the tutor would benefit from having this experience of, we all know the first few times you teach a class, you're learning so much, even though you're giving, maybe the same material, you just, it comes deeper and deeper. And so for very advanced students to be able to take the class a second time is incredibly valuable for the student. So in Jean's case, the students were not paid, but they sat in on the class and helped do some of the additional or the first draft work with the students. They did some mini lectures with the students or presenting of some material. Then you maybe led some review sessions before exams. But the students, and what Jean had to do on the independent study form was justify this is what the student's going to be getting out of this experience above and beyond taking a class the second time. And so for a couple of our students who have gone on to grad school, it's been a really great experience. But there might be other ways to implement it as well.
So the student gets independent study credit.
And maybe honors independent study, if you think that's appropriate, and you might want to talk to Horst about it.
Jean actually had we have a course, it's a course number.
Oh.
I think that's right.
Yeah, that's actually, this was actually my idea, so, not my idea, but I presented it, so let me kind of defend it.
Invented the internet, right?
What? Yeah, I did invent it. No, I got it at a conference where Muhlenberg was presenting this, and what they do is the faculty person will select 2 or 3 people in the course that have done very well, speak to them if they would be willing to be tutors, right? If the person is willing to be a tutor, they then, as Amy suggested, they have to sit in on every single class, right? When the course is given again, okay? So that if a student has a problem, they immediately can go to that tutor and say, could you clarify what was said? So the most critical thing is that the tutor sits in on every single class the next time the course is taught. Then that student is actually enrolled in a course, usually in the psych department, in counseling, for which they get credit, okay? And then they are compensated financially for being the tutor. So on their transcript then, and it seems to work very well, the students really want to do this, on the transcript they're getting credit for the course, and it's being made very clear that they functioned as a tutor, right? And this way, the students in the class have someone that they know who's a class member, if you will, who's there constantly all the time, that they can always go to.
Jean would also use it inside the classroom, like when they broke up into small group sessions and Jean's kind of moving around, the tutor's also moving around, so.
Jean called it a teaching assistant, was the language that she used, because she thought that would appeal to grad
That
schools.
sounds more like a teacher's, yeah.
I was going to say, and one of the things that came up in our session was that if the student is sitting in on the class, then that becomes a little bit of a scheduling problem, right? Because if they've got their own classes and then they're sitting in on the class. But when I did this as an undergrad, and I did this as an undergrad, it was, like Jean has it, it was a class. So in my 5-class load, one of my classes was identified and was on the schedule list, teaching in anthropology. And so my time was carved out for being in that class because I didn't have a fit other class, right? And so I sat in on the class and I ran the review sessions, and then I was there for, for peer tutoring and, helped proctor exams and did a bunch of other kinds of things.
And it was on your transcript.
It was on my transcript as a course, and so, like I said, then I could schedule it in, and the advantage of that is one of the things we were talking about, depending on the discipline, is that you could potentially have multiple different students who are doing this for different courses, right? If you're certain kinds of courses, not everyone is strong in all the courses, right? So having one or two tutors for all the courses that you offer in your department might be kind of problematic. But if you had multiple students or how they were interested or whatever, could do this other sort of piece, then you might have students who were really strong with this and are thinking about pursuing this, that then you could do it for that course, whatever, and then other students for other courses.
So can we do this? Can the current students be the tutor? Because that's a great idea. Because some of the students are way above
To
the other.
start with an independent study, like for this spring, to pitch it, to, like sit down with Ann Ayers and talk about what your goal is and how this would really, so that was something Jean, I think that's why Jean created the course, is at one point, a roadblock that she was able to address was that they said, well, the student can't take the same class twice. And she said, no, let me explain to you how it's not taking the same class twice.
If I can
Maybe
also
the
add,
current students, and they get paid. Let's say I have
They're getting paid
two
now.
very good students in my class.
Oh,
And
current
we ask-
students?
Yes, the one which you're taking now, because some kids are way above
I
the others.
have done that.
We can
with
do that. If
tutoring.
they could get paid,
Yeah,
then
so
they
you-
can help the
So you
kids
need
after
to
class.
contact Jeff, I think,
Yeah.
Jeff
If
Hempel.
you
so
contact Jeff
in
Hempel and
Jean's
say
case,
that,
this student had taken the class before, so they were sitting through the class for the second time. I'm just saying, this is the way Jean did it. And
It's a different
second,
model.
I saw, this was not saving Jean time
No.
working. Jean was putting as much time outside of the class working with the tutor as she, so it's not it was not a work saver for her.
No.
But
No,
it definitely increased the pedagogy.
It's great for the students enrolled in the class, and it's great for the teaching assistant. Richard, you had your hand up.
So once you've taken the
I'll
class
go.
2 times, though, now you've invested all this time in this tutor, can they now, let's say they're a junior, can they continue to teach, to be the tutor for your class? I mean, that's something I think we'd have to think about too, because
And maybe they could be more of a traditional model.
A traditional
where they're not
model then.
sitting in,
Yeah.
but they know the materials
Right.
well.
it sounds like something like this would just be a matter of aligning resources and people.
yeah, I think, we already have tutors that are through CASE. And so if you have students, those are the ones we're hiring, the ones that you're telling us. And we've tried to redo some of our financial model because at one point, a lot of our money was work study and some of these tutors are not work study. And so then it doesn't work out. So we've tried to change that so that we can hire some work study and some not work study. But if it's somebody who's in your current class now, just talk to Jeff Hempel and he can let you know if we have the dollars for it.
Okay.
I want to just change the subject if I could, just back to the larger agenda, so to speak. So I was, just as a matter of reflection on the day, I was very animated, as I think all of you were, with the conversation at Carol's talk. I thought Carol's talk was brilliant, but I thought the Q&A was even more interesting in some ways because of the way in which we were able to kind of begin to think together collectively about creative ways to enhance what we're doing. And so I was taken by these pieces. So I had written them down at the time. I'm very interested in the task force and then the whole faculty following this GEMS conversation because they're focusing, like we are, on the essential learning outcomes and looking back at general education through the 4 years, not just the first 2 years, and saying, okay, how are we actually providing pathways for students and thinking outside the box. It may come down to courses again, but it might come out to different kinds of ways of constructing pathways for students or constructing their own pathways. And I'm not sure I've thought it out, but the technology could be really creative and interesting. I was also taken by the notion and I love what Cyril's comment was. Is Cyril still here? Did he leave? Oh, he's here. When he wanted to get at the whole notion of signature, and the notion of scholarship circles for our students is really, as a faculty member, just appealing. I just can think of so many instances where we could put students together, particularly in those senior RFPs, where they might be regrouped a little bit if they have a common theme around some research. So it's not going to happen for most students, but it could happen for a good number in interesting ways. And then I was also taken by a conversation about autobiography. I think all of us have talked about this one way or another over the years, co-curricular requirements, co-curricular, whatever it might be. But the notion of asking students at some seminal points, maybe it's part of maybe the campus life people work with the ILCs, maybe that's the place to drop it, because everything else is in the first year, but maybe it's developmentally, who are you becoming because of this education? You know, short 5 pages, not your life story, but how is your intellectual life and your experiences here shaping who you're becoming in some way? Give some level of intentionality, and then again, of course, at the end, that could be in the RFT in some way, or some other way of doing it. But I think the notion of helping, and then the last thing I wanted to say was the notion of, I was just thinking out loud for the first time about this, the way we ask students to write lots of papers. I mean, teaching with George again this semester, and you know, the students are doing their first paper, and they had a chance to rewrite it, but it's hard to get them to imagine themselves as authors. Like we think of ourselves as authors of research and scholarship. And so the notion of moving them from writers to authors, however we do that, but focusing on that as an outcome that we're looking for, that they begin to own their work in some way. And Don's notion of using the personalized email response as opposed to just the written comments on the paper. I did that actually once or twice myself. And it's like you're a colleague with them. And suddenly their whole sense of what they're writing is different, at least for a number of them anyway. Yeah. So I love those are the things I took out of the day.
Thank you. Yes.
Well, yeah, just off the top of my head, so, you know, may not, I don't know what's going to come out. But I can just sort of see a senior doing their senior experience in this discipline and a senior doing their experience in this discipline, and they might have, I mean, if we could, not all of them, but just some might both be touching on a common, a common theme, and I can envision them doing their experiences like an LC, only it's just 2 people, and working together as a team, and then it's not just about a grade, it's really more about what they're learning from each other as they do that. So, you know, like a historical perspective, an economic perspective, or whatever it is. But how to shape that, I don't think one size fits all. So it would just have to be ways in which if we could find out as faculty what outside our departments, what others are kind of doing, so that we could shape some of these together. I think it would be beneficial to both of the students involved. I'm just not sure how that would happen yet.
And you're thinking of that in terms of the signature work that we were discussing earlier, Don? And what I found fascinating about that was that I think when you talk about students owning their own work and at the same time connecting it to the larger context and to the work of other students, then potentially you're teaching them how to do this important integrative cognitive skill, keeping in mind the me and what I'm interested in, and in mind the larger picture, being able to go back and forth between the two, which is really important to do but sometimes difficult to teach if you're not immersed in it. So I think that would be very profitable for everyone.
The conversation at our lunch table touched on that idea, that some places have student design teams, for instance, where they've got a project that's kind of long-term, and it's seniors, juniors, sophomores, freshmen all working on it together, and the seniors are taking the lead because they have the most experience, and they know how to do the research or the design or whatever thing it might be, but then the students with less experience are learning how to do those other skills, and the twist on that would be if it were an interdisciplinary kind of project. You're working at these problems or research questions from different,
different perspectives.
Yeah, so that you could have it interdisciplinary and almost intergenerational, if you will.
And connecting both of those pieces, I mean, we do this, the Anthro Senior Learning Community is based on Scholarship Circle, right? So the students are writing together in a group, and they do have much more authorship over their work because they're not just telling me and Alexa about it, right? That they have to answer their fellow students' questions about it and defend why they've said this and, you know, take criticism about what else they want to do and then offer it about someone else's sort of work. And so it does create that sort of sense of authorship that's different than when they're just communicating for you, which gets them the, like, it's a great, right, they're just communicating to you. But in that sort of model that we use, if, you know, it certainly would fit in that if we, because they're all doing different things, what connects it is that they're using an anthropological perspective, but they have lots of different topics. So if there were seniors in other departments who were working on topics that connected to the topics they were working on, but that are coming from a different perspective, right? So if we have a student who's doing something in health, right, and she's working at it from very much of an anthropological perspective, but there's a student in nursing who's dealing with a similar sort of health problem.
Yes.
But from a clinical perspective, if they could have a discussion, so it's beyond just our anthropology scholarship circle.
They're applying their disciplinary
right.
expertise,
To have
but since
this
it's
other
different,
piece.
it's, on a similar project, I think we could shape some of those.
Yeah.
John?
So I'm always struggled between the forcing a topic on a student versus giving them the choice to choose. But, you know, one thing we could do is we could build the senior, we have this thing where we have a representative from each department who presents their senior project. If we set that as a conference around a particular topic and we set it 2 or 3 years ahead of time, you know, so that so that each discipline was basically working on that topic, and we couldn't have all the seniors present, but we could have one, and then that senior day would be, instead of just sort of like, well, here's one and here's one and here's one, it would be actually a conference on something, and we could get a noted speaker in to give the keynote, you know, who actually knows something about it.
Yeah, I'm thinking how we can link the autobiography with this idea of the circle. I'm thinking, Amy, about our student Kelsey Hopland, whose grandmother had Alzheimer's, and then she was working on that. You know, it came out of their autobiography how she was interested in Alzheimer's from a scientific perspective. And then I had another student who was a philosophy major who was also interested in Alzheimer's because of her dad, but from a philosophical perspective. So sometimes the topics can come from their own lives.
Yeah, and I'm thinking out loud, because who knows if any of this will take, but you could have a system where the faculty could suggest, at the outset, some broad themes. That if you're doing your senior project on innovation, this group is meeting and this faculty member is going to kind of facilitate that for a while, or someone, okay? And one on sustainability, and one on ethics, you know, and so on and so forth, or one on historical period. And so you might find that, make that as an option for folks to kind of re-aggregate themselves that way. It would really be fascinating. Even if they're still in the senior RFT, but they're meeting this 2 or 3 times, maybe during the semester, and see what comes out of it. That would be really interesting.
Nick?
Well, yeah, if you want to add some real depth to this would take a lot of planning ahead of time. You could, if we did each year, each class had a theme. You could start from the summer reading before they get to Wagner College, and then they know that they can do this as a first-year student, so they're going to read about it before they get to college, do something small first year, more significant in the ILC sophomore, junior year, something very significant senior, and as John suggested, some sort of conference, this becomes a theme. If they've been working on this significant problem for 4 years, they're going to get the growth that we want, rather than to do one project 1 year, one project next year, one project another year. You don't get that growth if you keep jumping from project to project. If we pick one big project, you might get that growth in research that we're looking for, and growth in inquiry.
Lots of ideas for this committee.
And even if that was created for a piece, like that, again, one size doesn't fit all. So there would be this, in your incoming class, there's this theme, and there are these courses that we let you know that are attached to this theme, and there's this research you could be doing that are part of it from different disciplines, and not everyone's going to follow that track, but it creates a space for a number of students who are interested in sort of bringing what they're doing into that sort of trajectory.
But even at a much smaller scale, I know we do it in our business department. I'm sure most of you do it in your department. Don't we know in the beginning of the semester for a senior LC what the topics are that the students are going to be writing about? Sure, right? So
No,
Oh, because the screen's
Oh,
off.
it is-
I'll just push those. Oh, we lost it. Hang on.
She's coming out.
I'll just pull them down.
It's some sort of listserv.
Yeah.
I think you would do with your own
my
collaborative
my thought
research.
was, right, so my thought was if we knew, since we know in the very beginning of the semester what our projects, come on in. So since we know in the beginning of the semester what the students are going to be working on the papers, we could conceivably form or put it out there in some sort of, I don't know, someplace, right? So all to see, and this way, right, website, and so if they want to form or get together, or if there's some topics, that are coming from different disciplines, we can sort of help the students
That's
get together
great.
and do that.
Yeah.
On a more simplistic level, right?
Right.
Yeah. Any other comments, reflections, thoughts?
I was just going to say that throughout the afternoon, the morning sessions, the talk in the afternoon, I've been thinking about where does the Center for Leadership and Community Engagement fit into all of this. And I think that one of the important pieces to express as the now director is that it's important to us that we're focused on the academic learning and how to enhance student learning around community engagement. And so I think one of the interesting pieces would be to help design and maybe collect information, autobiographical pieces about, and community engagement is not just leaving Wagner campus and working out in the community, right? It's also being a good scholar in your field or in your class or here at the Wagner community. So it's a very broad term intentionally. So I think there's a place there for the center to help support you all in thinking about whether it's not a piece about how you're growing and learning, or a student is growing and learning and transforming, but a place for the center in that.
In trying to think about what matters to the students and matters to society.
Yeah.
I almost wonder if from the academic faculty perspective, if it's almost within our realm about, let's figure out what matters to the students, and then where on campus could we measure or figure out how does what we do matter to society?
Yeah, so I mean,
So,
one of the
because that's the
interesting-
part that I'm
I agree.
struggling with in my brain.
The Bonner model, all I could think about was the Bonner program model while Carol was talking, because the Bonner model first pushes for an entire year that we work with our students to get them to talk about what matters to them. Because when our first year students come, they're going to tell you, oh, changing the world matters to me, right? And, food issues matter to me, or working abroad in Africa matters to me. And so we're pushing them for a year to think about, try to really refine what that means and to pull out parts of them. I just found out one of our students is an expert piano player. So how does that relate to her passion with children? How can we connect those worlds to an issue or a crisis in education? She wants to be a teacher, right? And there is a huge crisis. We don't have enough music teachers. We have loss of funding for music programs, and so how do we connect all of these worlds? But we don't start connecting the real world application in that program until they're sophomore, and really they don't start applying it until their junior year when they have a really strong basis to do so. So anyway, just something to think about. But yeah.
Not to rain on everybody's parade, but I wanted to, one of the things that came up at our table that I thought was really important, many people said they thought the most important thing in the entire session with Carol this morning was what the young man in the corner said.
Yeah.
That people come here because they have a sense of obligation, that they have to go to college, but basically their imagination is dead or profoundly asleep. And what do we do with those students? And every time, it's really exhilarating to be around everybody when their imaginations take flight and we talk about all these things, and it's really important. But, we started trotting out these ideas that will never work, like wouldn't it be great if there were 2 years of national service that students had to do before they came to college, so they'd really know themselves and they would have a sense of the world beyond their very comfortable middle class digs where they come from, But what about them? What about them? Because we see them in our classes, and they can be a drag on all of this wonderful stuff that we're talking about. I feel a burden to kind of reach out to these folks too and try to stir them up, you know, and engage them somehow.
I think it's really incumbent upon us to work as hard as we can to reach students like that, because we should assume that every student is a cookie cutter version of, and then fill in the blank. I agree with you, Bob, and I think that's why days like today, when we're talking about different ways of reaching students across different disciplinary boundaries, using different types of pedagogies, talking best practices, talking about what works, what doesn't work, listening to the young men in the audience where Gary Schneider is speaking, should spark in us that fire so that we can really sit with our students, whether it's in the classroom, on the ferry, wherever, and begin to see their imaginations take flight.
You know what, I would just say,
No, it's okay. This notion of the autobiographical, I mean, and using the structure of the Wagner plan where you at least have the 3 checkpoints, because I think right now what I hear from students, and it comes more in a serendipitous manner, is they'll have the aha of the freshman learning community, right? And you'll hear about it when they're a senior or a junior. And I think that there might be a way to better structure that, to facilitate it, to guide its occurring, because I think it might be left just alone. And this notion of reflection, that's come up a couple of times in APC and discussions with EYH, right? About, well, what is reflection? How do we define reflection? There are all these different ways that we're doing it, but how do we say Wagner does it really well? And how do we capture that? And I think that there might be a way that we can enhance that. And that, so that students realize it, and they're not having these serendipitous aha moments. And so when they're out on a job interview, they can say, this is my signature work that was part of a larger Wagner enduring work, because there are enduring problems. And so occasionally I think you'll have a student that'll make it really, but they become a part of our work. That's getting better each year.
I really want to build off what you and Lily said. And to Roger, I would say, to add to what you're saying, Roger, so one, we should never conceptualize that as simply a faculty issue. You see it, you confront that in the classroom, but we have to think about the talent we have on the campus to work with the faculty and as collaborators with the faculty on that population. And I know we have that population, still have a part of our population that way. So maybe that becomes one of our signature projects across the domains of our employment category, so to speak, and say, okay, let's have some number of people, instead of having just APC, FPC, this, that, and everything else, maybe there's a group, a task force, a disappearing task force, hopefully, but a task force that says that we're going to identify the key stakeholders here who can put together an identification system better than we have now, or we have a good one now, but how do we actually make it more palpable to everyone so it's easier to use? And how do they work in teams, because they choose to work with recalcitrant learners or frightened learners or parochial learners or whatever it might be. And I know that Samantha has done a lot of work with a core of students this year where the light has just gone on. And their particular, one of the ways that the light went on for them was the civic engagement work they were doing in the summer, when suddenly they became important to somebody in the community. And suddenly they realized, hold it, I'm in a movie and I'm in the movie and I'm making the movie. You know? But it can come from a team, it can come from a class, it can come from an inspiring teacher or whatever, but maybe we should think about just a way to gather the folks in CASE, the folks in the faculty, and say, you know, I tend to see a lot of these students, I would like to work on this for a year with pedagogies and strategies and identification and ways to interact and arrest them.
Nora?
This will probably come across as a very simplistic statement, but to piggyback to what Richard just said, I've been thinking, why not bring a group of students together and make them part of this conversation?
I agree.
Because when you're open to their feedback, they really are great sources of information. There's so many changes that we've made based on student feedback, and it ranges from how we admit students, how we select them, to what kind of research they're doing at the end, to our EYH experiences came about because students said, we're the only department that doesn't have that opportunity. We want to learn about medicine abroad. So if you open yourself to including them in the conversation, they can be phenomenal sources of feedback.
Dawn?
I think we also need to bear in mind that it takes two to dance. And so, I mean, if we are, we definitely do what we can, I think, to present effective pedagogical models in the classroom to mentally engage students, and we need to do more of that and learn more of that. But if there is that student that you just can't get through to, that doesn't mean you're doing something wrong.
Correct.
It may not be that student's time. I mean, just need to bear in mind that the student also has to be somewhat proactive about their mental engagement in the subject matter as well. Now, that's not to say that we can now just throw information and leave the room, and then if they don't get it, it's because they didn't mentally engage. I mean, what I'm saying here is that we need to bear in mind that it's a dynamic. It's not just one-sided. We have to bear that in mind as we deal with it.
Well, thank you, everybody, and I would personally like to thank all the members on the committee.
Yeah, you're here.
We're going to do the drawing now.
Oh.